Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Above the Haze. Eric Postel here. I am with Harrison Wise today. He is the president of Wise Collective, ad agency out of New York, and also the founder and publisher of the Bluntness Magazine, a magazine dedicated to the cannabis industry. Harrison, thank you so much for being with me today.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me.
I want to jump right in with your story. Your background is quite impressive. I've been reading up on you, some of the things you've published on Rolling Stone. Look through the some of the content you've been putting out there for the various companies that you've worked with. Uh, Tell me about your life in advertising and in marketing, and how you got to now, and how you started to pursue cannabis as its own vertical.
Well, it's an interesting story. So I'm in the communications marketing games for about 25 years now. Started as an internship when I was in school. I went to NYU. Was initially pre-law and needed to pay the bills and make ends meet. So I found a job in an industry that was relatively unknown to me called PR. And I landed at a company that had a really good, founder and basically served as a mentor to me and continues to do so. This gentleman. So that was kind of the door that opened for me in terms of PR. And I shifted my majors in college, and doubled down on communications and journalism, and the rest is history. So stayed in the PR industry, worked for a couple of agencies in New York in the early part of my career, late 90s, early 2000s. And then eventually, predominantly in tech, did some real estate stuff. You do a little bit of everything when you work for an agency. You dabble in a
Hmm.
lot of different things. And as a naturally curious person, it was a good fit. And I eventually decided to leave the agency world and go in-house. And I worked as a VP of Corp Com for a digital ad tech company, and worked with them for about a year before they went belly up. And they went bankrupt. And that was the catalyst for starting Wise PR, formerly known as Wise PR, which is now Wise Collective, 15 years ago.
Wow.
So sometimes you need a kick in the pants, right, to kind of to do your own thing or kind of push you in another direction. So that was that
Don't
push, I
I know
guess
it?
I didn't know I needed, and that was the catalyst for starting my own agency. We were focused predominantly on tech. Tech was the niche that we served in the early days of 2007, and specifically ad tech, advertising and marketing tech. Those were kind of the sub verticals that we served, and we had a hell of a track record in that category. We launched and scaled and exited a number of companies to the likes of Google and Facebook. So those big guys acquired many of our clients in the first several years of our agency's life cycle. So really a testament to the kind of roadmap and blueprints and programs that we developed for our clients.
Hmm.
Um, and then in terms of cannabis, kind of getting into cannabis, it was an interesting, circuitous route. I've been a consumer of cannabis since my teens in New York. I've sold cannabis in New York. As a lawyer, am I allowed to admit that? Right, statute of limitations have expired. Right,
You're
I think I'm
fine.
okay. I think I'm okay. Um, so it was definitely part of who I am. Everything I've been around for many years as a New Yorker. Everybody kind of has at some point or another in their life a side hustle as selling cannabis or maybe even other things. So I certainly went through that same journey. So again, been an advocate of the plant. I definitely am aware of kind of how it was used, to oppress certain communities. So I was definitely aware of all of those things, but never really understood it as an industry. But it did kind of intersect with what I was doing in my agency life around 2015. We were working with an incubator out of San Francisco called SF New Tech, and in partnership with Rabobank, the largest agricultural investment bank in the world, they were launching a food innovation festival called Food Bites. So we were the agency retained to help, build awareness and put asses in seats around that. And that was really our foot in the door in cannabis. It was sort of an indirect entry point
Hmm.
to the cannabis industry or burgeoning cannabis industry at that time. and we were coming into contact with, vertical farming technology companies, automation technology companies for delivering nutrients to food, tomato plants, lettuce and spinach and what have you, which, as you know, vegetables are often used as, synonymous, or alternatives, for cannabis, right? Broccoli and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So we were, again, being introduced to a lot of folks who were in and around the cannabis industry through the guise of food. So that was our kind of entry point. And in that world, we came into contact with some folks at a company that we now know as MedMen, and we were the agency retained to launch MedMen. So that was our first true cannabis client, true experience in the cannabis industry, and that was in 2015. So that was, and I saw the opportunity. I definitely believed in the vision of what was possible in the cannabis industry, and parlayed that into a very active cannabis practice at the agency.
8 years later, what so much has transpired, so much has changed within the industry itself. From a perspective of communications, public relations, starting with the idea that this is a heavily stigmatized, historically stigmatized plant or agricultural product. And I would imagine that some of the things that you had to do deal with how do we present this so that folks get to understand it or get to learn about it in a way that they've never probably heard about it before. Uh, what was some of the things that you guys were doing around dealing with stigma and just the PR side of it?
Yeah, in the context of MedMen, I think it's such a great case study, and we're very proud of the work that we did. And it wasn't just us; it was definitely a team effort, and the founders of MedMen were visionary in that regard. So the primary platform that we rallied around, obviously, was around mainstreaming cannabis. Like, that was our communications platform. The secondary sub narrative, and the co-founder of MedMen, Andrew Modlin, was again brilliant in his vision and design build out for their retail locations, and defining it as the Apple Store of weed really set the bar pretty high, and became sort of the standard by which all dispensaries thereafter had to rise to. But that being our communications platform really was the driving force of everything that we did, and underpinned all of our communications effort. It was kind of the core message of everything. And it included decriminalization. It included destigmatization, supporting organizations like Last Prisoner Project and others that were, advocating for, the release of prisoners, et cetera, et cetera. So that was really critical at that time, and really just showing that, cannabis is not what people think it is, and really just chipping away. I mean, it's not something
Yeah.
that happens overnight. You have to repeat the message every opportunity you get, every interview you do. You have to reinforce that message again and again. And in tandem with the retail narrative, really, I think was a really necessary 1-2 punch at a very pivotal time in the country's legalization journey.
Yeah, I mean that resonates deeply with me. The narrative formation, the storytelling aspect is something that attorneys working in the space have to do as well when we're representing a client and advocating on their behalf. We're telling their story, but we're also telling their story in context of this backdrop of this very weird environment that has sent a lot of people to prison, that has led to folks losing, their liberties, their properties, so on and so forth. Yet at the same time, it's coming along where people are making lots of money on it, and we're in this very incoherent state of transition. How long does the transition period last? We don't know yet. We just know that we're in it, and so that storytelling piece of that I think is so critical. I want to pivot you then, continuing on the storytelling line. You founded a magazine, the Bluntness Magazine, which I know and I love and have been contributed to in the past. Why was it important to have an industry specific magazine in addition to the traditional services that you were providing?
Yeah, there were several sort of justifications for it. I mean, first and foremost, I saw a gap in the market for a publication that I think spoke to sort of a hybrid audience of those in the industry as well as consumers, and sort of bridging that chasm that existed. I think there were some really, and still are, some really strong trade publications that speak to sort of what, all that's happening in the cannabis ecosystem. And then there were sort of very specific cultural publications that spoke, like High Times, right, that just spoke to that, end user or
Hmm.
connoisseur. And there really wasn't much in between. So that was sort of one justification. The other was from a marketing perspective as well. There was very limited marketing opportunities for cannabis brands at that time, 2018. And I felt that again, having worked with ad tech companies and worked with the ad industry and being a marketer myself, I definitely saw an opportunity to sort of shift that, right, and create more opportunities for relevant ads, and reaching consumers at a scale that made sense to cannabis brands. And then the third thing was really just providing a accessible platform to educate, inform, and essentially further destigmatize cannabis.
Right on. And then continuing on, thinking about the advertising component, it's so necessary to create platforms where folks can advertise this type of thing. This is not a new concept that certain products have certain limitations or restrictions on advertising. Tobacco
Right.
went through its own history when you have Joe Camel, and then people realize, well, this is maybe targeting to children a little bit too much, so
Right.
let's move away from the cartoons. When and how you can smoke on television or drink alcohol on television, to now cannabis is dealing with its own advertisements and uh, where can it show what. And we've got a billboard. Can I hold the product? Can I show the product? Can I allude to the product? I can't. Can I market my business on the internet? Can I go on Twitter? Changes recently. Can I
Yeah.
go on? Can I do something on Google? How do I use SEO to my advantage if Google's got some restrictive components to it? If I put something on Facebook that even remotely looks like I'm pushing a cannabis perspective, they're going to shut my whole thing down. Our law firm got our marketing shut down for posting a Fox News story that I contributed to, local Fox, and just this is just on the news talking about it, and it shut it down. So it can be quite ridiculous out there.
Right.
How do we navigate this stuff? How do you navigate, and where are we currently with advertising?
Yeah, there's nothing easy about it. I think it is a case by case basis. There's yet to be universal standards. Every platform has its own guidelines and rules, and that you have to follow. It's not insurmountable, but it's definitely a challenge. And we approach it very carefully and methodically with our clients, depending on the markets that they operate in. Because every municipality, every state have, to your point, have different regulations and guidelines. But we're creative by nature. We're problem solvers as well. This is what we do on behalf of our clients: is help them, overcome the obstacles that are in front of them to get them closer to where they aspire to be. So, one of the first examples that we were seeing. I mean, Charlotte's Web certainly did a great job in the early days around CBD and kind of breaking through into the mainstream. And then again, kind of going back to MedMen as an example, their stoner campaign was a tremendous breakthrough, predominantly driven by billboards, but not exclusively, where they showed regular people, a firefighter, a grandmother, a nurse, people who we encounter in our daily lives, as stoners, are very true. I mean, and kind of redefining what that definition of a stoner is. Acreage was another. Acreage, I think, did I remember they did a PSA for the Super Bowl, sort of with the intention of it getting rejected, right? Which is a tremendous PR stunt. Kudos to, I think, Howard Schachter was the driving force behind that. So hats off to Howard, a great communications professional. But that was, again, another great example of how to use PR, communications, and storytelling to advance the narrative. And that was tremendously effective. By getting it rejected, it allowed it to get far more exposure than maybe it even would have as a commercial. But either way, it's a win. But those are just two examples. There are many others. But again, kind of going back to your question, we look at all of those opportunities: SEO, digital advertising, billboards, email marketing, first party data, right? A lot of dispensaries, in particular, if it's a retail location, they're acquiring data specifically from every consumer that walks in the door, and that is data that is usable, and you should be able to develop, and we recommend that develop that first touch relationship with your customers. So there's no silver bullets. You have to figure out what marketing mix works for you. But we're also big believers in finding the gap that allows you to interpret a particular regulation. And as a lawyer, I'm sure you can appreciate that, right? Sometimes there's a lot of gray area that could be left for interpretation. And it's not about breaking the rules. It's about maybe you didn't define it clearly enough, so we interpreted it this way, which allowed us to do X, Y, Z. And if we get a slap on the wrist, we get a slap on the wrist. But it's really working with clients that are confident and brave enough to take some of those risks. And those are far and few between. A lot of cannabis brands, and rightfully so, are risk averse. I get it. And then there are others that are willing to sort of toe that line. And let's put some things out there that allow us to interpret a particular regulation in a particular way and get our campaign through. So there are ways. And then the last thing I will say is that there are more opportunities than most cannabis brands think there are in terms of digital advertising. There are a number of independent cannabis media publications, the Bluntness included, Respect My Region, Honeysuckle, Fat Nugs Mag, Leaf Magazine, Northeast Leaf, et cetera, there and others that accept cannabis publication, cannabis advertising. So there are, again, a number of opportunities, both digitally in print, as well as outdoor and other channels that are quite effective advertising channels for brands.
You just triggered me. As things do become more mainstream, I mean, we're going to see consolidation in the market. We've already seen it, but we're going to see a contraction, consolidation, and then an expansion again at some point. This is going to happen not just for the operators, but for the ancillaries and the other related businesses, media included. Does the industry-specific platforms, magazines, media, do they sustain themselves as more traditional media might start picking up the cannabis advertising in the future, if we're looking out probably many years still? But what's the future for the industry topical magazine?
Interesting question. It's definitely something that we all need to be mindful of. Because certainly, while many of us are successful and we have reach, it can be somewhat of an echo chamber, right? We kind of speak to ourselves a little bit. And more of the mainstream pubs, to your point, have scale, right? They have reach far beyond many of us across borders, et cetera, multi-state, national. So if you are a multi-state operator, you might want to spend your money with them versus us. But, again, there is some, and I had written about this recently, a case to be made for contextual advertising, where you advertise your product, service, whatever it is you're marketing, around content that's relevant to that topic. So if you have a sleep gummy, for example, you might want to advertise around an article that talks about sleeping issues, et cetera, right? Or what have you, or melatonin, and there's research that proves, the efficacy of that kind of advertising versus targeting a particular age group or a particular geography. And there's ways to do both and combine those targeting parameters for maximum impact. But it's an interesting thought, that you bring up, and it's something that we should, as publishers, have on our radar. But I think we're all building our audiences right now, quite effectively. We have kind of domain expertise, which I think is important, whereas our entire staffs are covering the cannabis from a medical, recreational, professional perspective. whereas the Bloombergs and some of these other publications may have one beat reporter who are just covering it, and typically they'll cover either the legislative side of things. So there's limitations, but of course, you put your trust in the brands that bring you the information that you look for, that are neutral, and bringing you the tools, giving you the tools and resources you need to make the right cannabis purchasing decisions or to improve your health and well-being.
Yeah, I almost wonder if one of these or many of these cannabis lifestyle publishing makes the leap into more mainstream, a diverse portfolio itself, because it's not just about cannabis and cannabis users. It's about imagining a new society, almost a new way of approaching the way we take care of ourselves, the way we the medicines that we take, the community and the cultures that we have, the innovations that come from not viewing a plant as a Schedule 1 drug, but viewing it as a plant that has properties that are useful for a variety of things. I almost wonder if these things become the new, not to say supplant or replace Rolling Stone, but become something like that, where it's more versatile because it's speaking to a broader audience, especially a younger generation that grows up in this.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And I think a lot of the publications that I'm familiar with that are in the cannabis space are somewhat already doing that. Like Respect My Region is sort of music centric, right? And I think there are these little niche and micro communities that sort of overlap or intersect with cannabis in a very meaningful and very real way. I mean, music in particular is influenced by cannabis, whether it's hip hop or even rock and roll and what have you. Like a lot of folk music, Bob Dylan, Willie Nelson, country music. Like there's cannabis is a creative a creative driver of music for many years. It's intertwined with music, so that's a natural fit. Art and cannabis, right? So there are these little sort of microcosms within, and cannabis in and of itself is a community. So a lot of that's already happening. Honeysuckle, Respect My Region are good examples of sort of that intersection of music, art, and cannabis. And it is fascinating. I think it's an interesting thing to kind of keep an eye on and see how sort of the evolution of that, because it is going to have to be more mainstream, and it's something that I'm a big proponent of, in that as cannabis publications, I do feel that more traditional brands should also be looking at us as well to reach our communities.
Sure.
Live Nation, right? To market concerts and whatnot. Not that you can't reach consumers through other channels, but again, that going back to that kind of contextually relevant marketing, marketing to cannabis consumers on cannabis publications, that there's a particular, concert or event happening, an experiential event, even travel hospitality, right? Like, we welcome you. We want you to come experience our country, our hotel, our ABC, right? So I think that is really where we're evolving towards, and it's only a matter of time. But I think that's slowly starting to happen, and organizations like the Cannabis Media Council are sort of advancing those agendas and those narratives as well.
I'm imagining right now, Country Living with its dedication to cannabis cultural things within that.
I'm a fan of Garden and Gun magazine, and I'm also likewise waiting for them to have a cannabis article or two in there. We'll see. Time will tell.
A very interesting issue right there with cannabis and guns. You're starting to see in the legal constitutional law arena some challenges to restrictions for medical marijuana patients.
The Supreme Court did shoot that down, if I'm not mistaken, right?
It wasn't the Supreme Court, but federal courts are now saying that this is probably not a constitutional ban here, and I expect that is going to hold up if it did go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, alcohol and other drugs are far more dangerous in
the court that did address it basically pointed out how obnoxiously incoherent that policy really is. Better topic for another day. Yeah. Last topic I want to cover with you. victory to the bold. Everything's about brands. The better the brand is, the better opportunity you're going to have to sustain this really fluid and dynamic marketplace that's got ups and downs and ebbs and flows and inside outs and all arounds. Just want to hear your thoughts on what makes a good brand. What are the components that businesses should be thinking about when it comes to brand development? And what does a sustainable brand into the future look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there are a number of factors. I think really knowing what your core values are is critical that define the brand. Understanding who your target customer is important. You really have to define that so you know who you're marketing to as it aligns with your brand ethos, and really just reinforcing that. Right, you have to day in and day out live those that DNA in everything you do, in all your communications, in your social media, your aesthetic, your store, your experience. It has to, from start to finish, that brand ethos has to run. That thread has to run through everything that you do, and all touch points, digital, physical, etc. And I think, again, kind of going back to MedMen, they've kind of fallen off the rails in more recent years, but they still are a top known brand. They continue to be, a top 20 brand. They may not be top 10 anymore. And there are others that are doing a great job. And I think a lot of the newer brands that are coming into the market are doing a really good job of kind of understanding their DNA and really having that permeate at all their messaging and communications thereafter. But it all starts from storytelling too, right? What is the story? Like who are we, and why are we here, and why should you care? Those are all important aspects of that brand and brand narrative.
Awesome. Harrison, really appreciate you being on Above the Haze today. Last word I want to give to you, and I'm asking you for a single word. If you had a word to describe the meaningfulness of the cannabis industry as it is now and where it's heading, what would your word be?
Say that one more time. What's the question?
A word that kind of embodies the what the cannabis industry really means.
That's a good question. A single word to.
I'm asking the communicator, a word guy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Unstoppable. That's my word. Unstoppable.
I like it. Harrison Wise Collective, the Bluntness Magazine. Thank you so much for being with me today. Everybody, this has been another episode of Above the Haze. Tune in next time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Eric.